hear the word accountability, it often carries a sting. We think of finger pointing, blame, or someone keeping score of where we have fallen short. But, listeners, what if accountability isn't about punishment at all? What if it's actually the framework that allows businesses and the people inside them to thrive with clarity, freedom, and alignment? Welcome back, listeners, to today's episode on the BizBlend podcast. I'm your host, Sana, and today we are joined by someone who spent more than 40 years transforming chaos into systems across 47 industries, from corporate giants like General Mills to niche craft businesses. Our guest has seen the full spectrum of complexity. And what lights her up most is showing ambitious entrepreneurs that accountability, when done right, isn't a burden. It's the heartbeat of businesses that run themselves. So let's dive in and listeners meet my incredible guest, Gwen Bortner. Gwen, welcome to the show. And it is really, really an honor. And I'm really excited for this discussion.
Sana, I am so glad you invited me to join you as a guest on the show, and I am so excited to talk about accountability.
Super, super. Okay, so let's try to understand the status quo here. Now, most leaders, and I'll be very honest. You know, a few years back, I also used to think that accountability is all about taking blame, taking the responsibility of every wrong doing that has been done, and it means calling someone out when things go wrong. How do you define accountability in a way that actually builds stronger businesses?
So accountability is still about taking ownership, but instead of focusing on what someone did wrong, it's really about focusing on how do we move past it? What is the problem that actually needs to be solved? And so often we get caught in, did you do it or did you not do it? And if you didn't do it, well, shame on you and now go do it. And that's not helpful because most of the time, if you didn't do it, there's probably a reason. It may not be an obvious reason, but there's
Mhm.
probably a reason. Most of us don't just, defiantly not do things. That's, not really our mode of operation most of the time. And so instead of focusing on that, focusing on what prevented you from getting it done, how do we solve that problem so that you can get it done?
Hmm. Hmm. That's powerful. That's powerful, Gwen. Because when uh, I think what you are saying, it flips the script here. Because when you mentioned that, it really sounded like um, less about punishment and more about alignment. And I think a lot of listeners may be realizing they have been approaching it backwards. So that is really, really powerful. And why do you think so? We often keep on saying that leaders should hold themselves accountable. You should hold yourself accountable. Why are you not accepting your mistakes? How would you translate this in today's modern corporate settings?
Well, so there's a couple things. One is that you as a leader have to be willing to be held accountable too, which means your people that are working for you have to be able to say, "Hey, I needed this from you and I haven't gotten it. What do we need to do to get that fixed?" Right?
Mm,
And a lot of times as a leader, we don't want to be held accountable. We don't want to be held accountable, particularly if we're an entrepreneur. We like that flexibility and the freedom, but the accountability really is a two-way street. It's a conversation and a reflection process, and reflecting both back and forth, so both directions of it. And I think it just over time got, I'll say distorted because we got focused just on the task, and we simplified it down to, "Did you or didn't you?" And it's more than just the task. I mean, the task is obviously important. If there's not a task, then there's not anything to be accountable for. But it's more than just the task. It's really about understanding how do we keep moving in a positive direction, and how do we help our people continue to grow as part of it. Because I think everybody wants to be successful, and I think being successful is also feeling successful. And I think for most of us, feeling successful is about growing and improving over time. And that to me is where the accountability process can be really useful. But when it's really about punishment, that's not useful. When it's about
Mm.
shame, we don't respond well to shame. But when we're put into a mindset of problem solving, that's where we can grow.
That's very, very beautifully said, Gwen. I really love that you mentioned specifically around, how success shouldn't be um, equated with perfection, because we humans, we look at a bigger we look at the bigger picture. We humans are not perfect, we are flawed. So this definitely calls out for a collaborative approach where you're co-creating. For example, if somebody in the team has done a mistake, then it doesn't mean that you have done the mistake, you are responsible for this. Yes, we have done it, and let's together try to understand, try to solve it, and then also try to understand what exactly did it lead to have that mistake done, so that we can learn from those situations, and then we can accordingly adjust ourselves or be flexible enough to accommodate those learnings. I think, yeah, that
Yeah,
makes
well,
sense.
and a lot of times in that process, that's about both of us understanding,
Yeah.
what part we played in the situation happening. One of the things that we talk about a lot is instead of focusing on why, focus. So we often ask the question, "Why did you do that?" Well, our brain will immediately go into a defensive mode when someone asks why, because we take it as a personal attack. Even if it's not meant as one. It's just, it's a subconscious thing that our brain will do. But when we ask, "What caused that to happen?" or "What can we do to prevent that from happening in the future?" Then our brain goes into problem-solving mode, and it goes away from being about us, so therefore we have to be defensive, into about the incident, the issue, the thing that we're working on, and so then we can be in a very proactive problem-solving mode, and that's where the switch really starts happening.
Hmm. Hmm. I agree. I agree. And can you give an example, Gwen? Like, because you have worked across 47 plus industries, and that is incredible. But if you can give an example where reframing accountability, it shifted a team from fear to empowerment.
So one of my I was on a call recently with one of my clients who's just recently been implementing this. And what she talked about, it wasn't as much about, fear, but it was about that the way she described it is, says, "For the first time, I feel like all of us are rowing in the exact same direction." Right?
Mm.
So that everyone is working toward the same goals in the same way. And for her, that's where the power was. She also had to let an employee go. It was probably about 6 months or so ago, and one of the things that she said, "If I would have had this process," she said, "I think I would have identified way sooner where she got completely off track so that we would have been able to bring her back on track, back to rowing in that same direction." And she said, "I may not have had to let her go, but because it just got so far off, it felt like there was no possible recovery for it." And that's the power of accountability, is it allows your good people to become even stronger, and it also helps identify the people who really just aren't going to get it, and to be able to, release them to go find a place where they can be successful.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. And this really sparks a question within me, Gwen. I don't know whether it's relevant or not, but I have had the opportunity on BizBlend to explore so many different types of leadership. We have, talked about. I've spoken with so many guests around intuitive leadership, or talking about emotional intelligence or EQ, empathetic leadership, servant leadership. Do you feel that is there any specific type of leadership that um, is more accountable, or that is more acceptable towards accountability?
I don't think there is. I don't think there is. That's the beauty of the accountability piece. I think that all types of leadership can still use accountability in the way that I define accountability. Back to it's not about shaming and being accusatory. It's about working together to keep moving forward. And one of the things that I've realized, and I've just been starting to work on, kind of refining this, but if you take account any sort of leadership, any of these types that you talked about, and I'm familiar with all of them, and they all have positive aspects to them. You add accountability, that's where you start getting consistent results from your team. Um, and but I do think the accountability does require the leadership piece, but I don't think it's a particular style of leadership that makes it work or would prevent it from working. As I said, I think the only thing that applies here is as a leader, are you also willing to be held accountable?
Hmm. I think that I really agree with this distinction, because when accountability, it is um, baked into the process, it doesn't rely on the style of a single leader or leadership or mood. And that's exactly where, businesses, they become less fragile, especially during transitions or any, global unforeseen challenges, like, just we saw pandemic and the economic uncertainty and all that.
Right,
So,
yeah.
hmm, hmm. And also, Gwen, you have said most entrepreneurs, they don't need more information. They need better questions. I really love that. And I think this is also applicable when it comes to the entire humanity. As humans, we should ask better questions. We may not have answers to all of them, but let's try to have that curiosity. Um, how does accountability connect with asking the right questions here?
Well, so there's kind of 2 aspects of it. If
Okay.
you're holding someone accountable, it really is about reframing the question, which to me is asking the better question, right? And like I said, being able to reform it from making it about what about you made this not happen? That's not helpful because, like I said, our mind goes into all of the wrong spaces, very subconsciously, very fast, not helpful. But when we're able to reframe the question around the event, the activity, the task, and have our mind go into problem solving mode, that really
Mm,
is the better question, right? Because that's the thing that we can solve, and that's the thing where we are now working together toward a common goal of solving this particular problem. But for ourselves as leaders, one of the things that I often ask when I start working with a leader is who is holding you accountable? Who's asking you the hard questions? Who has
mm,
the power to do that? And often that's the place that there's an element that's missing because as the CEO, as the leader, who is the person who's saying to you, um, so what happened here? How, what's preventing you from moving forward on this thing? What are those hard questions that are needing to be asked of you? One of my favorite books is a book by Annie Duke, and it's called Thinking in Bets. And Annie Duke was a former professional poker player, which is an interesting an interesting job. But one of the things that she talks about is we have learned to assume that the result of a decision is directly related to the decision itself, such as if I get a good result, I must have made a good decision. But that's
Mhm.
not always true, because the other side of it is if I got a bad result, I must have made a bad decision. And that's not always true. And so the question is, who's asking you about the decision? Not about the result, because the result is the result, but who's asking you about the decision? Because if we get a bad result, but it was a good decision, we often won't make that same decision again, and that may actually not be a positive path. But on the same side, often we'll get one good result and we think, oh, that's a good decision, but it actually wasn't a good decision. It just happened to get a good result this time. And so the next time when we don't get a good result, we're like, oh, yeah, but we know it's a good decision. We've gotten a good result once. So that's the place where having someone who can ask you those questions and help you think through, are we really doing the right thing? Are we doing the right thing at the right time? Is this the piece that needs to be focused on, or is it just the thing that has my attention right now? And so to me, that's where those good questions come in is who's asking you the hard questions so that you're actually having to go deeper into the process and not just, quickly jumping from thing to thing to thing to thing.
Wow. Wow. I can see now so many parallels in there, especially when we talk about uncertainty and like taking bets. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting book. I think I listeners should definitely check out. And also, I think instead of piling on advice, you are pointing out that accountability is really, really about focus. Like, what questions guide us back to what matters the most. And it's definitely like clearing the noise so a team can also see the signal.
The focus is such a huge piece of it, and that's really what accountability is about. Most anybody who's in business at some point has seen what's called the Eisenhower Matrix, the cross where we talk about important versus urgent, right? And you get those 4 quadrants of, important and not urgent, important and urgent, not important but urgent, and not important and not urgent, right? And we've talked about prioritizing that. But the thing is, if you aren't careful, we miss working on the important but not urgent. And actually, the thing that's usually most valuable to our business, to what's going on, to really moving the business in a positive direction, actually sits in that quadrant, in that important but not urgent. But we get distracted by all of the important but urgent things. And what I've found over time is most of the time, things don't land in the important urgent category first. They actually start in the important and not urgent category. And eventually, because of deadlines or other things, they fall into the urgent category. But if we could be working on them in a much more um, regulated, calm space, thus doing focus, we would actually get a better result than when we have to work on them once they land into that urgent part of the important category.
Hmm. That's I think a golden nugget in there. And since you mentioned about the book Thinking in Bets and about the author, that really once again sparked a question within me. So a lot of entrepreneurs they don't know what kind of support they actually need. When it comes to advisor, coach, or consultant. Um, how does accountability differ when working with an advisor, coach, or consultant, Gwen?
So when you have someone from the outside that you're working with, any of those kind of things, an advisor, a coach, or a consultant, um, One of the things that they can provide is that outside perspective. And the question that you want to be asking yourself when you're looking to hire them is, what all
Mhm.
do you need from that person? My definition, and of course, that's one of the things is that those words get used a lot interchangeably.
Yeah.
And I have very specific definitions. For me, a coach is someone who's helping you pull out the knowledge that you already have about yourself. They're not really adding a lot of new insight. They're helping you see what you already know. And so there's places that is super, super useful. It's often about leadership styles and things of that nature. And accountability can absolutely fall in there because they can be asking you those hard questions that are making you reflect, for yourself. A consultant typically is bringing a solution to you. And what I
Yeah.
find by my definition of consultant is they're usually solving a very specific problem in a very specific way. um,
Mm.
I don't typically think of consultants as someone who's going to necessarily hold you accountable. They may hold you accountable on a particular thing that they're working on, but not overall. A business advisor, by my definition, is someone who's looking at all aspects of the business, but staying in a more strategic level. And a true business advisor should also be able to hold you accountable, to be watching for the patterns within yourself and the business, seeing how those are working together, and really helping you stay focused on the things that you need to be doing, holding you accountable to those things, asking you the hard questions, and providing that outside perspective, so that you don't get caught into your own beliefs and your own culture that you've created within your business, that may not really be true. It may be the thing that you want to be true, but it may not be what's actually happening in it. And so those are the places where I think it's different, and like I said, I really feel like a coach can hold you accountable and a business advisor can hold you accountable. I feel like a consultant is generally, if they're holding you accountable, it's only toward a very specific, narrow project or activity that they're working on.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think that clearly defines all three of them, and I think it's quite literal as well when it comes to advisor, coach, consultant. So, Gwen, that brings me to another um, question here. In fact, it's a scenario like if a business owner keeps bouncing between all three without any, visible progress in there, what does that signal to you?
So that often signals to me that they don't actually want to be held accountable.
Oh,
That they're looking for someone to just confirm their own personal biases. They aren't actually looking for someone to hold them accountable, which is I'd love to say being held accountable is a lovely thing, but it there are many times that it's uncomfortable. And if you're willing to work with someone who will hold you accountable, you will generally stay with them for a period of time. Now, I'm not saying that you have to stay with them forever,
mhm,
because sometimes it's for what I call a season, for a period of time. But if you're
mhm.
bouncing back and forth and back and forth, what you're probably looking for is someone to just agree with you and tell you how smart you are. And that's not necessarily helpful in our definition of accountability, where we're looking for someone who's actually going to say, no, this part is yours, you've got to own it, let's figure out how to solve it, and then let's move on.
Exactly. Also, that definitely brings a lot of intentionality in there, like intentionally making choices, taking that permission to slow down and analyze the circumstances, the prevailing questions, and then making decisions based on them.
Yep.
And before we conclude, Gwen, a little bit of a nuanced question in here. Um, when it comes to accountability, some would argue here that too much of it slows things down. Like the constant check-ins or reports, and all that. It creates bottlenecks instead of output. How would you respond to this critique?
I think the key is having a system that doesn't take so much time, and that's one of the things that, over time I have developed and, am developing a system to train others to use within their own organizations. Something that is what I would call a low lift. And what I mean by that is the system that we use, the person being held accountable, it takes them about 15 to 30 minutes a week, so that's really not very much time out of an entire week. And the person that is the leader, it takes them about 10 to 15 minutes per person a week. So if you've got, a staff of 6 direct reports, that's an hour and a half out of your day, yeah, out of your week. So not a big investment there. The same client I mentioned earlier when I was talking to her, she had said by doing this, she was actually reducing the amount of time that she was spending, holding her folks accountable. And one of the things she said toward the end, which I thought was interesting, is she said, "This process is allowing me to actually know more about the details, but I'm still staying way more out of the weeds than I was before." She said it's fascinating. I know way more about the details, but I am way less involved in the day-to-day pieces. And it says my folks are moving forward way faster. So I think that's part of the trick of it, is that good accountability really is about streamlining the communication and just focusing on the things that really need focus, and not getting caught in all of the other pieces.
Exactly. I think that also brings a lot of resilience, in terms of the entire, whether it's a startup or an organization or a team dealing with challenges or sudden shifts in industry or in economy, or any kind of scenario in there.
It does, and that's part of the thing of a really good accountability allows everyone to understand when priorities shift and how they shift in a much more, consistent manner, and so all back to, the phrase she used, everyone starts rowing in the same direction much, much quicker.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So I believe we are concluding this conversation at a very, very hopeful note. So when, if our listeners, they would like to connect with you, what would be the easiest way?
You can find me on LinkedIn, pardon me, LinkedIn at Gwen Bortner, Bortner. And you can also find me via our website at everydayeffectiveness.com.
Super. So I'll make sure to have all the links and details in the show notes for all of you listeners. So connect with Gwen. And until then, if I can conclude, I think what I'm taking away is accountability doesn't have to be heavy. It doesn't have to be about blame games or shame or finger pointing. And as we have heard today from Gwen, it can be about clarity, trust, intention, and building the kinds of businesses that don't just run, but run with purpose. So, for all the entrepreneurs who are listening, maybe this is the invitation for all of you. And it's simple: shift from thinking of accountability as a burden to thinking of it as a gift. So, Gwen, thank you so, so much for this really, really insightful conversation, for giving us some golden nuggets to take away with.
Thank you for having this, Sana. I have really enjoyed the conversation.
Totally, totally. And to all the listeners, thank you for being here with us on this blend. Until then, this is your host, Sana, signing off. Thank you.